Happy New Year. On behalf of Jennifer, Daniel, Brian, and myself, Carrie, we hope you have a fabulous 2021. And we're here to help you with that. This episode's being published Thursday, December 31st, 2020. Can you believe it? 2020 is almost over. I'm popping on here real quick to do a little bit of housekeeping with you. I've got 3 things to tell you. Number 1, starting January 10th, we are doing a 5-day marketing challenge. It's going to run through Monday to Friday. This challenge will help you attract your ideal customers. It will give you simple and easy strategies that you can use for the rest of the year to help you execute a marketing strategy. It's super simple, and if you can invest 5 to 10 hours in these 5 days, that's total, not each day, so about an hour to 2 hours a day, you will be set up. You will have a path, you will have an understanding, you will remove friction between you and the money. And you won't have to hustle quite so hard or at all for new clients. And the ones you do get, the ones you attract, will be better clients, will stay with you longer because they are the right clients. So if you want to participate in this challenge, which myself, Daniel, Jennifer, and Brian will be doing with you, click the link in the show notes to sign up for the newsletter, or go to podcasteditorsmastermind.com, scroll down a little bit, plug in your info to sign up for the newsletter. Super simple. If you're already signed up to the newsletter and in the community, you're good to go. You do not have to do anything special. You will get all the stuff delivered to you Thursday, January 7th, so you can be ready Monday, January 10th, 2021 to start the challenge with us. Second thing, we will be announcing a slight change to our schedule in the next few weeks because #2020. Things have changed professionally and personally, and we need to make some tweaks, mostly so we can stay up long enough to do the live stream recording. We've had some life changes, so we're going to make some tweaks. We will absolutely let you know, and the best place to find out is the newsletter. Third thing, even podcast editors are not perfect. So one of our guests, who will remain nameless, had a recording fail. So we had to strip the audio from the Facebook Live. And if you've ever had to do that before, you know it's imperfect, like seriously imperfect. So we did the best we could with it. Despite that problem, this is a fascinating conversation to listen to. So if you aren't familiar with Steve Stewart and Mark Deal, because we kind of forgot to introduce them because we were so excited from the survey result reveal. They are the co-founders of Podcast Editors Club, Podcast Editors Academy, and the Podcast Editors Conference. So they do a lot of work in this podcast editing community. Without further ado, let's start the show.
How much is that?
Well, here we are at the after party on the Podcast Editor Mastermind show. We've got Steve Stewart and Mark Deal with us, who just revealed the big survey results from the 2020 Podcast Editors Survey. If you missed that, go back and watch the replay for sure. We're going to start with where we ended. I think, about the DAW question, because you were kind of like holding back some information from us there. So
maybe we should let them frame up what that question was, a little bit about the survey.
Yeah, so Steve has been asking people for years, hey, how much do you make as an editor? And last year, I asked Steve, like, hey, can I have those results? Because I want to do some math stuff that I kind of missed from my corporate days. And I had some insights. And this year, I was brought in before he did the survey. We asked a little bit more questions. And one of those was, what DAW do you use? Not that I expected that to influence what people were quoting. And it turns out it did. So that's the setup. That's the background.
If I understand this correctly, there seems to be some kind of mathy correlation between what software you use to edit and how much you get paid. Is that right?
How much you ask to get paid. Yes.
Yeah. So as an editor, I want to know, what software should I switch to?
And I'll stick to the answer I've been giving to people on social media for the last 5 years. Use whatever DAW that you are willing to invest the time to learn correctly. So I don't think there's a magic bullet out there. Even though the math said there was, I still don't believe there is.
Okay, so what DAW did the math say there was?
Steve?
It was Pro Tools.
Pro Tools. Mm-hmm. We have any Pro Tools users in the house?
Nope.
Not now.
Not yet,
not
you mean,
switch.
right?
And I have a theory on that. Now, we can't prove it out from the survey results, but I think it's because when you're working at a radio station, when you're working in a recording studio, a lot of times the software they're using is Pro Tools. So you're going to get a head start using the tools there before you ever come over to podcast editing, or at least, when you think about the history of audio production, digital audio production, I should say, before, after reel-to-reel tape and stuff like that, Pro Tools was kind of head above the rest. And it was, Jennifer, weren't you using something like Cool Edit Pro?
Cool Edit Pro in radio, yeah.
Yeah, see, you got
all the radio people I know around here on Cool Edit Pro until it died, which is why we're on Audition now.
Which was what, 2002?
Well, I had it on my computer till like 2016.
And now we've got Pro Tools as the big heavy monster studio production software. And I think that's where, if you're looking at people who are charging more or asking for more, if you got the certification, isn't there a Pro Tools certification? I believe there is.
I think there is, yeah.
Yeah, if Chris Kern jumps over here, he can answer that for us. I think that's why Pro Tools was showing up as the higher for people who are charging more or asking for more for the editing. And they've got that background behind them, the experience.
Yeah, and they, on the local recording studio place, the like Lexington Audio Engineering School, something or other, they teach and give their students Pro Tools. Mm-hmm. So then they're being professionally trained and learning this. Now, are all of them going to be editors? I don't know, but if you're going to invest the time and money to get trained on something like that, you're going to want to charge more.
Now, I'd like to throw this question over to Carrie, because Carrie's been using Audition for 5-6 years. Is that correct?
No, actually, it's not.
You haven't been using Audition for 5 or 6 years?
Only 2 years.
Okay. And now you're being required to learn Hindenburg for the Stony Brook education, right?
Well, required loosely, and I kind of gave up on it.
Okay, but that's interesting that somebody is actually showing you Hindenburg as being part of the curriculum or the tools that you need to learn whatever the education pieces that you're taking there.
Right, because that's what they teach in journalism school.
Right, because Hindenburg is built, and I'm sure Brian wants to jump in now, is built more for that storytelling type of rearranging post-production side.
Yeah. I think the way I like to tell people is most software that you would use is built for mixing. And Hindenburg is built for editing first. So built for story first, built for moving things around. Other software can do that. But the primary function of a lot of those softwares from inception was really about mixing music and doing the things that happen with that.
So was Hindenburg DAW Y?
Hindenburg was. So
Really?
those were the only two DAWs that consistently moved the needle. And they weren't the majority. They weren't the DAWs majority in use, right? There was Adobe Audition, there's Audacity, of course, there's other ones like Reaper. I don't remember all the other ones, but yeah, Hindenburg consistently had people quote $23 more for the job, and Pro Tools $59. So yeah, Pro Tools was number one and Hindenburg was number two. And I think now with the knowledge that everyone has given me, it's because people go to school to learn to do this as a job. They learn Pro Tools. So not only are they learning Pro Tools, but they're learning how to do this as a job. So if they leave their job to become a podcast editor, they have those skills to do this as a job and present themselves as a professional. Somebody's been doing this for perhaps many years. So maybe Pro Tools, that's why it was strongly indicated. And then Hindenburg with journalism school, maybe that's another reason. Those are perhaps the paths to get in, where somebody pointed out it is expensive, but like Adobe Audition isn't cheap either. But since so many people have it, but again, do they have the training to be an editor or run an editing business, which is what Steve and I specialize in.
Yeah. And I think maybe there's also a bit of a price gap with Hindenburg, right? The pro version is nearly $400, which is on the expensive end, unless you start counting the monthly subscription for Audition, right? So Audition's what, 25 bucks a month? But
I think 30 now.
30, yeah. You put that over a couple of years. Yeah, it's more expensive than Hindenburg, but it's not more expensive all at one time.
More accessible.
But we thought it was interesting because I like to have interpretations for this type of data. When I pull in and the math tells me like, hey, this is an indicator, like, but why? What can I learn from that indicator to improve myself or improve others? Do I need to have what that indicator is giving me, or is there a root cause underneath of it that is really the thing? And that's what I felt with DAWs. Like, well, I can't see software driving it, but I thought it was the path to software. And thanks to everybody here, now I understand that a little bit more.
I think another important thing to mention is that when you're learning Pro Tools, you're not learning to edit so much as you're learning about the audio engineering piece. Audio engineering is a step above just learning how to cut the ums out of it. You know, when we talk about editing, the definition is more about cutting, editing, and maybe rearranging things like that. Whereas when you're looking at Pro Tools, it's more about the music mix, the EQ, the compression, the things like that.
I always thought perhaps it's the path in, and I see Mary in the chat. Thank you. And Chris is saying the same thing, as well as Amita is saying the same thing, that the schools are teaching with Pro Tools. So people are learning to do this job in a structured environment to get paid to do this job using Pro Tools. And so not only are they taking what they've learned in their DAW, but how they go about it, and therefore, charging more.
And audio engineering is going to demand a higher rate than just editing.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things when I raised my rates was when I started using RX. It was like, oh, well, now I can do more things. Maybe those two things just happened at the same time. Like, okay, it's time to raise the rates.
Well, we can't all go out and get Pro Tools and then just instantly tell our clients we got to charge more.
No,
it doesn't work that way.
Just kind of.
Yes, it's the audio engineering piece, I think, that comes along with learning Pro Tools that made that, at the top. Plus, we're talking about Hindenburg and what Mark was saying about learning the job, and you've got that experience to bring with you to the podcast editing side, because podcast editing is still a baby industry. We're still small, but there's a demand out there for it, which I think is fantastic. We're those big fish in a small pond right now, all of us.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask, because Mark Yellen had asked about the DAWs, but how many people, do you have a number for how many people use Pro Tools in the survey?
I do. Let me...
You're going to make him open up his Excel spreadsheet.
Oh, no, not Excel.
I'm not going to open up my Excel sheet, but I did it when we did the podcast editor, the survey results in the club. I showed this Pareto chart, which has it in there. And you were asking about Pro Tools was 15%. So 15% of the people that responded were using Pro Tools.
How many people responded? Was it
136?
Okay. So I'm not going to do the math, but I'm assuming other people can.
So about 20, 21, I guess. Yeah. Now I feel like if I open up the spreadsheet, I'm going to fall in a black hole. You won't hear from me. So Steve has told me, Mark, you are not allowed to open spreadsheets. I'm what he calls a spreadhead.
That's okay. Mark, you can go. I'll carry this. I'll carry us both.
All right. Bye.
Brian, I'm sorry, I interrupted you, so I'm gonna.
Oh, that's okay. That was a great point about that, right? What's the percentage? How many people use that? Because I think that's something that people, especially people that are interested in doing this as a business, they might just want to know, like, what are other people using? Mm-hmm. If people wanted to get access to this and they haven't already seen that video, where should we send people to get that information?
Oh, that's a question to us about the survey.
I mean, we could talk to each other, but
in fact, you want to put up a link to Steve's newsletter. You can sign up for that. If you're not on the email list, you should get on Steve's email list. He's going to send the replay out to everybody. There it is. Thank you for throwing that link up. If you're signed up on that, you're good to go. You're going to get the link to the replay. If not, you should definitely sign up and get the replay and some of the other insights from the replay and from this talk and from some other things that we will put in there.
And that link is podcasteditoracademy.com/newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Sorry, I told you would lose me if I opened up Excel.
It's all the pretty numbers.
Exactly. And I do colors and numbers.
Yeah. So was there anything that kind of stunned you in comparison from last year to this year?
Well, it was a different survey because we asked a lot more questions. I think the big thing that stunned us was the pay gap. We knew there'd be a pay gap, but it went the other way because everybody says women don't get paid as much as men, and women are underrepresented. And I mean, we saw last year in the podcasting space, or podcasters, a lot more women were coming on board. I think they were saying it was over 40% of podcasters were female. And now we're seeing that in the editing space, even though there still are more men, at least the ones that took the survey, it was 2/3 of the survey were men. Well, that left the other third were female. And that Mark was able to pull out of there was the ones who identified as female were charging more, asking more per episode.
Consistently charging more.
Yeah.
They were just busting that mold.
Well, okay. So here's something that I think that may have also influenced that. And I think you guys are partly right that it has a lot to do with the fact that we work very hard as women to find clients who are the right fit for us. And I also think that that coaching piece is so important to women as well, and the customer service, those kind of things. But also the fact that women consistently have been having the conversation about rates for as long as I've been doing this, right? Which 3 years, as long as there have been Just Busters, which I think is 2 years old.
2 years.
Yeah. And then, but I also know in other production organizations for women, they have the same conversations and they do a lot of surveys and things like that as well. So I think that this is something that we as women, and not only women, anybody who doesn't identify as male, we've been having these conversations ad nauseum, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that because of that, we're having a shift, essentially. So.
And we have the conversation in an encouraging one another way, too. It's not like, oh, you are so silly. What are you doing? It's like, no, you're worth more than that. Why are you, charging that? Okay, that's a great place to start. But now that you've been doing this for a while, you need to edit or something like that. So Just Busters is a nice place. So ladies who are listening and those who identify, please join us. Just Busters. Google it. You'll find us.
And I think you guys might have just gotten a little bit of a shout out Just Buster related, right? The survey might be skewed because the females you have in Podcast Editors Club as well as the Just Busters are invested in changing that gap. That's a really big deal.
Well, good.
I know for my day job, it's something we continue to talk about, right? How do we make sure the larger company that I work for, that they do that? Mm-hmm. And I applaud them for that. It's really great to see that made flesh right here. That's great stuff.
Yeah, I think that was reflected when we showed early on the demographics of our Facebook group, which isn't just women, it's mixed, as well as the survey respondents we had a little bit more women percentage. I think it was 36 vice like the 32 in the Facebook group. Mary asked how many women was that? That was 49 in the survey. And I also agree to Mary's other point earlier on the comment that I just saw popped up, that I think women showed up and said, oh, this is what I make. And because they are active in the space, probably because what you said, Carrie and Jennifer, that you've been challenging them to step out. Let's openly talk about rates. Don't let anybody get underpaid. Don't undercharge. And it's working. You are just busting that mold. And I love it. And I'll applaud Steve and maybe myself a little bit. When we did the Podcast Editors Conference, we're like, who are we going to get to talk about sales and marketing and branding? We didn't get guys up there. We got the strong women that knew what they were doing, and we learned from them.
I already had in my head who the branding, marketing, pricing, getting the right clients. I already had that in my head before we even started writing them down on paper. And that's because you guys already stand for those things. We're talking about, Carrie was talking about the branding, because your branding is on point. And Emily's talking about the marketing. This is all at the Podcast Editors Conference last year in person, which was fantastic.
When we could do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Way
And
back when.
boy, it was such good information too. That information also trickles down to the guys in the room, which hopefully, we're charging more as well. But the important piece to remember here is that we've got these two Facebook groups, they're just Facebook groups that are helping people to improve their skills, to get the confidence from the community to be able to ask for more.
But now I'm worried about the guys. They're lagging so far behind, right?
Don't worry about us. We'll worry about ourselves.
Keep in mind, the overall rate increased this year overall.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Steve. Thank you. And that is the industry win that we can all share together. And we can learn from the ladies. I imagine that, right? I mean, my mentor for the last 4 years is a woman. Back before Robin Stiles got up on stage and said, men, hire women as your mentors. I'm like, yes, I'm already there. But as we spoke earlier about Pro Tools, people that use Pro Tools are getting paid like $60 more for that standard based job. What is it about that industry and the path to use Pro Tools that Steve and I can learn from and teach everybody else to further increase that rate? So it's a mix of a lot of things. And we're using these factors, these indicators to point us to, hey, this is significant. Look under that rock and try to interpret it. And we're doing that with the help of all of you. So thank you.
So we're talking about like being able to use the survey to see the work that we need to do, right? Now, this is the first survey that included women, and then it also included non-binary folks. There was that option.
Well, to be clear, the question was posed, do you identify male, female, or I forget the third option there.
Yeah, and I asked Steve to put that in there. It's like we have to ask gender. Steve, I want to use this for statistical survey. I know women want to know what the gap is. We need to ask, gender identifying questions. And when people chose to identify genders or non-binary genders, we got to see if it influenced rates. So it was kind of baked in last year, but we didn't know where it was because again, these are anonymous surveys. Google doesn't tell us who you are. Google just says, look, this person has already responded, so they can't do it more than once.
So what about ethnicity or race? Is that something that you're planning on including in the future? Because I think that I know a lot of the work that we do within Just Busters specifically is to kind of amplify people of color, women of color, especially being for white women who, coming from a place of privilege and running this group, that's something that's really important to us. Do you have any plans for that in the future? Like, because I just want to know what work we need to do, right?
Agreed. Here's what I would say to that. We're going to add more as we can and as we think it will give us some ideas. That being said, so what? So what, Carrie, if I were to give you perfect information, if people of color are making less or are making more, so what? I say, let's go ahead and include those people. Like when Steve and I did a Podcast Editors Conference, we made sure that we included women. We included people of color. I run Podcast Atlanta. Atlanta's a very diverse population. I make sure that the stage is as diverse as the crowd. So to that, so what? If I were to give you perfect information, is that going to change what you're going to do? And if so, not you personally, but if so, shame on you. You should do that now with that mission in mind.
I'm saying, like, as a community leader, that helps me prioritize what pieces I need to work on, like more like so critical need, essentially, right? Because we're only a few people right? Serving, 1,000. So, that's what that information, I think,
I see
is
that.
helpful for.
Yeah, I see that. And again, I'm going back in my corporate data science thing. I used to tell executives what I would call the cost of curiosity, right? There, and that was basically like, hey, if I were to give you, Mr. and Mrs. Executive, perfect information on that, are you going to change your behavior, or is this just a nice to know? And really, if you are just looking for data to justify what you want to do and what you believe is right, do what you believe is right and leave my team alone. Again, that's about my corporate speak. One of the things I'd really like to ask, if I can shift a little bit, and I don't think we'll really be able to anytime soon, is what industry people are in. Because I think industry is a big reflection of how much you make and how much you could make. If you're a podcast editor serving farmers, or a podcast editor serving CPAs or attorneys or personal finance people, I think that probably swings the needle a lot. Also, I'd like to look a little bit more into regional variation, because there was a lot of countries that just had one person. I want to see, can I group things to find out a little bit more. So I'll get off my soapbox. I apologize, but that's, as you can tell, somebody that runs a podcasting group in a very diverse location. It's something I'm very passionate about.
And I don't want anybody to be disappointed if we don't ask those questions in the next year's survey, because there already are a lot of questions to answer, and we don't want to scare people away because it's going to take 30 minutes to fill out a survey. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to entice people with a $5 bill to fill out the survey because that gets to be expensive. So we're going to evaluate what we think are the most important questions that need to be asked and get that data so that we can provide this very good information next year in 2021.
But I think that Mary's point is also a good one, because she said the information is not just helpful for you guys, but it's information for those that identify with the spectrum to be represented and see that they can also do this job. And I think there's value in that. So I would encourage you strongly to include that data, simply because this is what the community is asking for. This is what this segment of the community is asking for, those who may otherwise feel marginalized or unrepresented. I think that it will not just help us as community leaders, it will help inspire them to be more confident podcast editors and more active participants in the community, which make us all better, I think.
Okay. Agreed.
So
it's an easy question and we could put it in. But again, that would be next year. And I was really just trying to challenge people to look at what we have now and take that to pull yourself up, as well as if you have the opportunity to pull other people up around you, do so.
Absolutely. But I'm just challenging you because I'm thinking ahead now, right? I'm thinking about next year. I'm thinking what, people have asked to see in the future. So yeah. And if you need help, right? Because I know you're just two guys doing this for the love of it. Yeah. I'm happy to
that actually would be helpful. So, I mean, Carrie, as well, I see Mary in the chat as well. The hardest part is getting survey respondents, 136. It took us 6 weeks to get 136 editors into it. And next year, I think we'll do a survey a lot like we did this year. So that way we can have a little bit more of a trend. You saw I did some gross comparisons of averages last year to this year, but it really wasn't enough for trend lines. And we could still include ethnicity as well as some other questions and still be able to have some trend line data. And that'll be interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, more respondents is always good stuff.
Well, we'll get, we'll get behind you and push that out to the world. So.
Cool.
Now, one of the things that when you were talking about it live in the reveal that you went, this is interesting, were the events. Like, well, if you go to one podcast event, but if it's this event versus that event, but if you go once, you see this bump. If you go twice, forget it. And you just scratch your head like, where?
Yeah, I was doing the same thing.
And when I was listening to that, I know that when I go the first year, I'm meeting people, I'm seeing new people, I'm looking for referrals. Hi, I'm an editor. I'm introducing myself as that. I'm branding myself as that. Nobody knows me here. I got to make myself out to be the editor, and I get referrals, and this works. The second year, I'm like, hey, friends, what's up? And I'm not, or especially the third year, I'm not even thinking about trying to get new people anymore. I just want to hang out with folks. So
You're walking in the room like a boss.
I know. I'm like, hey, yeah, it's me.
She knows everybody, right?
So from my perspective is why you might see some of that. But I don't know. Daniel, you've been quiet. I'm going to put you on the spot here.
I don't have anything on the event. I didn't catch anything. No great insights for me there.
Oh, okay.
Steve, you want to recap what we're talking about for those that didn't see it?
On the which piece? Because there was a lot of stuff. Talking about the conferences, right?
Yeah, the conference piece.
So we found a big correlation of people who went to PodFest.
No, it was the other. It wasn't so much PodFest and Podcast Movement, but the ones that were not PodFest and Podcast. These other podcasting conferences. The
Right. Well, that was the large win. It was to go to the other conferences because, again, I think Carrie, you actually commented, and I think it's the perfect analogy is, big fish, small pond. When you're walking into a room of 3,000 people at Podcast Movement, there's going to be other people who are your direct competition. Now, there's going to be a lot more demand inside that room for what your services provide as well. But if you're walking into, I'll just use the example of Podfecta. It was a podcasting conference. It was limited to 100 people in Nashville. And the number of people there who were podcast editors was probably me, myself, and I. That's 3 people. That's it.
It was me, Brian, Daniel, and you, Steve.
Oh, that's right. You guys were there. Yes.
Yeah, we were there.
In the front row.
Yeah.
Everybody but Carrie.
Which, by the way, probably highlights the point, right? It's the same people over and over again at these smaller conferences. So you get a bump if you go once, but do I need to see all of you again? At a small
Yes.
Yes, sir.
But not for.
Let's just go to the bar. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what's
So going
interesting is that last week we were talking about this very thing is going to industry conferences and being the podcast person for your industry. Steve, we used you as an example. Like when I think of FinCon podcasts, like you're the guy. So there's a huge value in getting outside the podcast bubble into your niche.
Yeah, there's a lot of history behind that as well. I was already attending the conference for 4 years before I started editing for anybody. And I was only doing the editing for myself until 2016. And as soon as those, there's this growing community of people in digital media creating content, and podcasting was on the rise. I was already ingrained in the podcasting medium, not because of podcasting, but it was something I was already doing with my financial coaching business. So that when the switch got turned on, Steve's editing podcasts, I need an editor. I know, like, and trust him because I already know him from the FinCon Expo. That just started the phone ringing, and it took over. So when we're talking about going to non-podcasting conferences, again, big fish, small pond. Even though that was 2,000 people who go to that conference, there wasn't a lot of editors there. Just like you would say, there's not a whole lot. The majority of people aren't Instagram marketers or Facebook ad specialists. There are people there who are, but there's only a handful, a very small handful. And when you get to be known inside of a small community as that guy or that girl, you get instant credibility, even though you haven't earned it from that person. I get people all the time recommending me, and I've never worked with them. I might have had a small conversation with them on Facebook, and for whatever reason, they recommend Steve's the guy. It's not really earned credibility. I'm not going to turn it away. I want to make sure that everybody understands a lot of the survey results. One thing that didn't get highlighted that I wholeheartedly believe in is the customer service aspect of it. When you provide really good customer service, no matter your skill level, you win over your client and they stick with you, and they're going to bend over backwards to help you do whatever it is that you need. Take a week off or whatever. They're going to help get you the files early.
Yeah, that was that was a note I made about people the editors that offer coaching. It's like the musical window. The editors that offer coaching are getting 19 something more.
Yeah.
So like you're positioning yourself as an expert. You can justify higher rates. You are attracting higher quality clients, or I guess higher ticket clients, because the people that are looking for coaching and for consultation can afford to pay it. And they're probably using the podcast for like a business or something. So they're the ones that can afford to pay higher rates. And then on top of that, through coaching, you're building that relationship. So that way, as you grow in your business, you start charging more. They're going to stick with you because you have that relationship.
Yeah.
It makes it, you're worth more. And as you mentioned, it makes that hurdle rate higher. So it's harder for them to fire you because you're so much more entrenched. And I believe, again, this is my interpretation and belief of that data that strongly pointed that people that offer coaching and consulting services make more, is that since they are positioning themselves and not just an expert in the podcast production side of things, but also your outcome as a podcaster. Some people want great guests. Some people want ratings and reviews. Some people want, to sell more services and consulting or downloads. And I think people that offer coaching and consulting services look at those metrics, identify those metrics, and help their clients reach those metrics, and therefore perhaps get paid more, even if they're not. And this is the thing with this question, as well as the events question. We weren't asking, where do you go to get paid more? We were just asking, what do you get paid? And then we asked all these other things. So even the fact that you offer coaching and consulting allows you to get paid more when you're not doing it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like, if I can give a testimony, because with the coaching aspect, if you're going to be, let's say you've got 5 people in the room who can edit podcasts. They're all equally skilled. They're all charging the exact same amount. You got the one person walks in the room. You all do the same thing, except one person offers coaching, or they have the ability to coach through problems. Which one are they going to pick? You're going to be able to command a higher rate because you know both sides of the microphone. The coaching thing, I really do think is a really important piece of that. Rather than just being an editor, you've got to be able to do all the things. Even though you might not do all the things, you just got to be knowledgeable about it, because that client may lean on you for some advice, some support. I just lost a client, one of my highest paying clients this week, because they wanted video editing, and I don't do video editing. So because I don't have that skill set, and I don't want to do that thing, by the way, I'm losing a high paying client. However, I gained another client because of, all this support that I give to this niche community I'm talking about. They're just already like, oh, Steve, I just need you because you're the guy. And I give value through communications, through Facebook group communications. We just had our expo virtually online last weekend. The coaching, the ability to help and provide great service, that all adds up, and that helps me to be able to create I'm making a living editing podcasts. It's insane, but it's true.
Yeah. And then just kind of to piggyback on that, most clients aren't going to hire you or like stick around because you can EQ perfectly, or you can like engineer their show to perfection. If you can help them like with the technical side of recording to make it easier, make them look good in front of their guests, help grow their show, like that's what's going to keep them around.
Deliver on time.
To expand on that a little further, it's not just those aspects, although yes, they are super important, but I think at its core, it's really coming down to that customer service piece, where how do you communicate with people? Mm-hmm. How do you approach every problem like the customer, the client is wonderful, right? And that your job is to encourage them and work them through those problems without letting on ever that you are so frustrated with them. I mean, really, that is a challenge for anybody working in customer service. How do you pull that off? Like it's effortless and like it's not a problem and we'll take care of it, and communicate that to the customer so they really feel like they're getting that high level of service. And I think that is a developed skill. I don't think that is something that just happens.
Right.
Customer service is probably your most expensive activity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It takes up more time, and you're not really benefiting from that time, not directly. Even if you're getting charged, if you're charging them for coaching, then you are. But when that customer service aspect comes into play, you're going to go the extra mile to make sure things are done right and they're delivered on time the way that they want it. And they got an email, they got a question, and they forgot to send you 2 files that were the right ones, and you started editing the wrong one. I mean, it's all stuff that happens. Mm-hmm. you can't complain. Oh, I guess you can. I think
Not to them.
I think Brittany drops a hammer on her clients, but they love her anyway.
So I'm sure if we could all watch Brittany interact with her clients when there's a problem and when they frustrate her, you would never know it. I'm sure it would be like a teaching moment for all of us. I think Brittany, if you're listening, we need you to record yourself in these situations so we can have like when you call the customer service line, like, so we can all have training with you.
That's your next course.
Yeah.
Brittany, you're right. If anyone hasn't seen or heard that episode of Brittany on Podcast Editor Mastermind, go check it out, because it is a master lesson in customer service. In fact, when I even talked about that block in the Podcast Editor business model, customer service segments, I quoted how Brittany does that. You have to work within her systems in order to be able to be her client. Is that going to be you, or are you going to work with client systems? And really, that all depends. But yes, thinking about customer service and how you'll interact with your customers will affect your prices and how you sleep at night.
Yeah. And I don't want it to sound like I was trying to make Brittany sound like a horrible person. She's not. No. I think she's fair but firm.
Yeah. Yes.
When you're honest and truthful with people, they know where you stand. And I think that also plays into this factor a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And it's probably a whole different episode, but because she works with coaches who know, like, they give advice. So like they are kind of like those tough love kind of people. So they can appreciate whenever she's like telling them, like, this is what you need to do in order to whatever. It comes down to,
I would argue with that, though.
Oh, really?
I think it's a lot easier for people to give tough love than to receive it.
Sure.
As I pointed out, I think it has to do with editor-client fit. And I think that I really feel that perhaps women are doing a better job with editor-client fit than perhaps men. And not just using one example, but the 36% of those that respond. Perhaps that's why they're doing it. That, as well as the support in the Just Busters group and women bringing each other up.
So that kind of brings me to something that I made a note of. And one of the surprising statistics was that editors that have been editing 3 to 5 years make less than the average. Yeah. And when I saw that, like, I thought back to, where was the industry 3 to 5 years ago? And this was pre-Podcast Editor Academy conference. It was kind of like when I was first getting started and just learning about the Podcast Editors Club. And since then, we've had a huge push in the editing industry to charge more, and then couple that with Just Busters, who are pushing for higher rates. So you have, editors that have been 3 to 5 years that are kind of stuck maybe in that old mindset and harder to, either they have clients that they don't want to raise the rates on, or they're kind of on old pricing. But then you have like this new crop of editors that are seeing what the industry is now, seeing like there is a lot of money to be made, are getting encouragement from Just Busters, from the Academy, from the club, to charge what they're worth. So I think like new editors are more confident to charge more and are skewing the data, I guess, younger, newer.
I'm not 100% convinced that's true, though, because we've got Stephanie here in the chat just commenting that it would be really interesting to see how skills also play into that, right? It might not just be length of service. There might be some other factors. Did you guys test for anything that goes with length of service?
We did not. Although it wasn't length of service. It was experience in editing. How long have you been editing, whether paid or not, right? And we had a different question for getting paid. So somebody who's been editing 3 to 5 years may have been getting paid to edit for like 6 months. And that was 2 different questions. But again, whether somebody had been editing for 0 to 1 years or 1 to 3, 3 to 5, there was a dip. And then after 5 years, the dip was gone. And my interpretation was that people are starting to understand how much they don't know. You know, when you first start editing, you're like, oh, it's just a simple, at first you're like, oh my gosh, it's so hard. Then you're like, oh, it's a simple copy paste. I'll move stuff around. Then you start learning about LUFS and EQ, compressor, levelers, plugins, different DAWs. I think maybe people are, my interpretation was people are starting to fear what they don't know. Now, what Daniel was saying is a good point, and I hadn't thought about that. Perhaps the people that have been editing for 3 to 5 years, they came in as, you know, Steve Stewart and long list of names. I won't list them all, but since, you know, Steve is here, really putting editors on top and saying, hey, editing is a job. There are people that edit podcasts. Perhaps those people were kind of born into that and felt perhaps they had to undercharge in order to be competitive. But those that came after realized I should charge a lot. And those that have been before, the incumbents, are like, I should charge a lot because I've been doing this before, Steve, you made it popular.
So now I've come full circle and I'm agreeing with Daniel again.
I think it's a mixture of everything. I mean, you know, there's not going to be one factor that decides this. I mean, it's probably a mixture of things.
We had a question from the chat that I'd like to hit. Oops, that's not the right one. Mary asked if there was a question about how people were getting clients, sales, referrals, conferences. I don't remember that being on the survey. Was that something that we covered?
It was not in the survey, but that's definitely something that I would like to ask. Again, this is kind of an indirect thing, Mary, because we're asking people, hey, if you were presented with this job, how much would you charge and how long would it take you? We're not really finding out how much people are making, or we're finding out how much people are quoting. You know, if we had access to like some type of credit card database or some Upwork Fiverr type thing, whatever, you know, then we would have non-biased data of what people are actually charging, paying. But that being said, yes, honestly, that's part of our mission, Steve and I at Podcast Editor Academy, is to help people, you know, run and operate a profitable podcast editing business to grow their client base and get charged more. And that really falls in line with the preview of that. But we were just been taking baby steps year after year of like, you know, what more can we ask? What more can we ask? So, you know, next year, we plan to ask that as well as some of the other questions that people were asking about race and ethnicity.
Yeah, and that question, we didn't put on the survey, but I do know that it's asked constantly inside of the Podcast Editors Club, and I believe it's probably asked in the Just Busters Facebook group, and I bet there's a whole stream on Reddit about it, too. You know, where do you find clients? And we do hear people find clients all different places. It's not one big pool of Facebook, you know, communities and things like that. It's all over the place. We have to go back to that niche idea. You know, where's your niche? Where are you the big fish in the small pond? Because, you know, when I'm in a group and if somebody mentions podcasting, everybody starts talking about podcasting. Not because I'm there, but it just seems like the conversation always goes to podcasting. So if you're the person who's in whatever group it is and you know about podcasting and you start talking about some things that you know about podcasting, now you're the expert, you might be finding a client there.
Yeah, and I think that also goes back to the attending the conferences, right? Attend those conferences where, you
conferences
know,
or meetups. Let's just say meetup groups,
yes,
networking events.
Yes, and that's it. Networking. Yeah. That's the word. You have to network outside of the bubble. There's no point in trying to find a client in a group of podcast editors.
And a good networking environment too, not the old ones that we're talking about. You walk around and introduce yourself, and I hated that. These are the places where people go to meet because of a topic, a subject. It's not necessarily a networking event, or you know, I don't want to say bad things about some of the activities that go on at the larger conferences, but when they have those speed dating type things, I don't know if people get clients from there. I do know that you're going to meet people, and I think more importantly, you meet them there, but then you see them in the hallways, and then you bump into them in a session and at an after party, and that familiarity is on your side. Mm-hmm. Now you've got you've got the familiarity, you've got the conversation going, and now the door's open to having that discussion about, you know, I was thinking about starting a podcast. Mm-hmm. Maybe I should hire you to help me with that.
How we would do this next year is we would provide a list of maybe 5 or 10 possible client sources and a free text area, because Steve likes to torture me with free text stuff that I have to sort later. Isn't it? Trust me, I had a lot of fun with that. Breaking out the Python skills. And But we'll ask people like, hey, rate your top 3, 1, 2, 3 of where you find clients. And between those and then correlating them and having the math predict the price, we'll find out which ones, people are finding most of their clients through Fiverr. Yeah, they're making, much less than those people that are finding clients at the industry events. And then, we'll be able to correct and correlate and adjust for factors such as, people's gender or people's race or people's location. Luckily, that's what, it's, data science is science. The math lets us do that.
Can I take over this mastermind?
Free text torture.
Yeah.
I want to ask each one of you to tell me the 3 places you found clients or that your clients have found you. Let's start with Brian. 3 places that clients have found you or you found clients.
First client I had was a guest on my show because somebody recommended him and that he became a client. So there's that one. Mm-hmm. One client I met because of ongoing interactions through Facebook groups. And a third client I met because of my relationship with Chris Curran, and it ended up being a referral.
Fantastic. Jennifer.
Okay, so my first client was from Facebook, and I've gotten others from Facebook. I've gotten folks from conferences by being introduced and by wearing the podcast editing as my job, not your shirt. I got a client from that, which was at a conference. So go buy that on Steve's store. And then I am a local expert here in Lexington. So I've gotten some, I run the podcast meetup group here. And so I'm trying to level myself up and get referrals because I'm the expert.
You've positioned yourself as the expert just by having the meetups, by facilitating those communications. I love it.
Yeah.
Daniel.
Fiverr.
We're so proud of you for growing up.
And to be fair, I am much, much higher than I started out. Word of mouth referrals, so clients referring new clients. And then I've gotten a possible client from my Reaper group. So for being kind of like, the admin in that group, whenever
you position yourself as the expert.
The expert. Mm-hmm.
I love it. All right, Carrie.
So my very first client was from Upwork. Mm-hmm. But now Facebook, Instagram, and from doing podcast interviews and speaking at non-podcasting conferences.
And those 2 last things, the interviews that you are doing, it's because you position yourself as the expert.
I see a theme here, Steve.
And it's not always about podcasting. That's the fun thing. Yeah.
But do you talk about podcasting?
Yeah, that's that's kind of like goes in the bio, right? So, but yeah.
And my 3 are FinCon, so I'm the oddball here. Every single one of them is a FinCon or referral from someone in the FinCon community. But it's that niche and that's that putting yourself out there and being I don't want to say a leader, but you're exposing yourself as an expert in some way. And there's so many different ways to do that. You've got to be the one who stands out in the crowd. And that's going to be hard for some people who are we're virtual and everything now. How do you stand out in the crowd without being one of the many circle faces in the Facebook groups? You know what I mean? It's really hard. I don't know if I have the answer for that. I will say, though, that, it's the niche. You got to be in a niche, and it's not about podcasting. It's about whatever topic, subject, genre you're familiar with and you really enjoy.
And you have to show up and you have to be consistent about it. Right. And then Susan asked how I get invited to speak at non-podcasting conferences. The truth is I don't get invited. I apply. Right. I'm looking for these conferences to speak. I look for, especially now, it's great. There's local virtual conferences. I'm getting in kind of at the state level, at least, because I live there are lots of chickens here. I come across things just on Instagram, on Facebook, I'm in other communities. Women in business is a great kind of neat, a broad niche, but a great niche for somebody like me. So I actively go out and seek those out. I spend at least one day, an hour a week looking for that stuff.
I think it's a really good point is applying to speak at conferences where you're interested. I was not editing podcasts when I first spoke at FinCon. I spoke about podcasting because I knew more about podcasting than everybody else in the room. But I wasn't editing podcasts at the time. I was able to submit a topic to speak on. And I'll tell you what, the most important thing when you're submitting a topic to speak is the title. Come up with a juicy title that truly represents what you're going to talk about. But if you've got a attention-grabbing title, that's what your subject will be about, and that's what people are going to show up for, and that's what the organizers of the conference are going to pick you from. The description is also important, but that topic title is really, really important.
Yeah. I spoke about podcasting at a virtual dog trainer conference this year, and they approached me because I'm the local expert. I don't know if anyone watched it or not, but I recorded my little hour about podcasting for dog trainers.
That's amazing.
I feel like we need an episode on how to craft a conference
pitch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say, as somebody, I've done 40-some events, and I've worked with a lot of the conference organizers in the podcasting space and outside the podcasting space. The application processes are great. Definitely reach out to the conference and event organizers, and not only present yourself as an expert or whatever, but honestly, make it easy on the conference organizers and event organizers, because they want somebody that is going to be easy to work with and please a crowd. The expertise is like a close 3, but it falls underneath 1 and 2. So if you can show 1 and 2 quickly and concisely, you're in. That's how I got on the stage in Internet Summit at a few cities, and I was the only podcaster. Like, oh great, you're our token podcaster up on stage, and they know a podcaster can talk. They didn't even ask for my speaker reel because I'm a podcaster, and now I'm a podcast producer. I haven't had my own show since 2015. But sure, they still put me up on stage. So yeah, network with the folks that run the place.
Well, it's time to go because Mark has changed his icon on his name from Star Trek to stats to zzz. So I think he's fading fast. But we wanted to give a shout out to the Podcast Editor Academy again, and everyone should sign up for their newsletter, which is podcasteditoracademy.com/newsletter. And then you can find out more about what we've been talking about. The link to the results, will it be living in the Facebook group for a while too, or will it just be in the Academy?
The replay will it'll be in both.
Okay.
But it will only be in the Facebook group for, we're figuring about 30 days.
Okay. So
now, is there something I can share over in Just Busters for our ladies for a limited time?
We would have to find another way of doing that because the group is closed, so we wouldn't be able to share it straight out.
Yeah,
but I think it's something important for them to see.
Yeah.
Yes.
They should just join the club.
Well, they should. I mean, I agree.
But I don't want to force them to do that if they're not interested.
But we want to give our audiences options, right?
Mm-hmm. Mark and I'll talk about how we might be able to do that. We'll see.
Yeah, and the best way to get notified of that is join Steve's newsletter, because once we hook that up, it'll be up in his newsletter, and you can go and check it out. I will say the survey results, it's not something we typically keep behind a lock and key. The 2019 results are still up there in public from like 14 months ago. Sure, a lot of the stuff is inside the Academy only, but the survey results are too important, I think, for the industry. So yeah, it'll be out there. Now how, where, and what link, we just did it tonight. The best way is to get on Steve's newsletter.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for joining us, and for the Podcast Editor Mastermind group. If you want to be on this show, you can go to podcasteditormastermind.com/be a guest and join us. And I'm Jennifer Longworth. You can find me at bourbonbarrelpodcasting.com.
I'm Carrie Caulfield. Eric, you can find me at yayapodcasting.com or follow me on Instagram at Carrie Eric.
I'm Daniel Abendroth, and you can find me at rothmedia.audio.
I'm Brian Ensminger. You can find me at toptieraudio.com. I don't know who to point at next. Let's go down to Mark.
I'm Mark Deal, and you can find Steve Stewart and I over at podcasteditoracademy.com.
And I'm Steve Stewart, and you'll find me at podcasteditoracademy.com.
Hey, that's my place too.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining us, and thank you all in the chat. It was very nice to have so many people watching this evening.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
So how much is that?
So